All right, welcome to January's Rock Game Dev Talk, everyone, previously known as Rock Game Dev Workshops. So glad you could join us. In case this is your first time tuning into a Rock Game Dev workshop or talk, I'm Sam, Rock Game Dev's talk coordinator. Rock Game Dev is an organization dedicated to fostering a community of game developers and game creators in Rochester, New York. Our mission is to provide a local platform for game creators at beginner, amateur, and professional levels to learn, share, and collaborate in all aspects of building games. If you want more info, head over to our website at rockgamedev.com. And if you've got an idea for a talk you'd like to give or a talk you'd like to see, please let me know. You can find me at Sam Camerata on Discord and Sam Catamaran on Twitter. Um, Without too many more announcements and intros, I'm going to announce tonight's talk, Breaking into the Game Industry panel. Please feel free to drop any questions you have for our panelists in chat as we go. But without any more shenanigans, I'm going to hand it over to our MC for the night. Take it away, Ro.
Hello, everyone. So we're about to get into some other kinds of shenanigans. We're going to talk about breaking into games today. I have a lovely panel with me, experienced game devs of all kinds. So I want to get right into introducing them, and then I'm going to talk about the format for today. So why don't we just jump right in? Luna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. So I'm Luna Meier. I work at Blizzard as a senior technical designer on World of Warcraft. And before this, I previously worked at PlayStation and then Unity doing support jobs and helping developers create games all across the industry.
Cool. Ian, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm a game designer. I've been making games professionally for since the year 2000 and unprofessionally for a couple decades before that. Wrote a book called Breaking into the Industry. May as well plug that. Um, and yeah, and I've been doing lots of design work, teaching work, all kinds of stuff. So I have, yeah.
Very cool. And Kat?
Hey, I'm Catherine DeFeo. I'm currently a UI artist at WayForward Technologies. And before that, I was a 2D generalist at Working Man Interactive here in Rochester.
Awesome. Well, welcome to all of you. For their full bios, you can go on the event page and see that they have actually written out more for you to learn about, and you're going to get to know them through this panel. So I want to just quickly go over the format. We do have a script of questions, but we want this to be open-ended. We want this to be free-form and casual. So if you have questions that come up, especially in response to something that someone says, feel free to just drop it right in the chat. And Noah is keeping an eye on the chat, and Noah's going to surface them to the panelists so they can answer your questions directly. Again, this is meant to be a learning experience, and really my questions that I have in the script are just like example questions, but if you have a specific thing that pertains to you, it's probably better. So feel free to just jump in. The first question that I have for you panelists, actually before that, I do want to mention that some of the topics we are going to try and cover in our scripted questions are goal setting, developing your skills, creating a portfolio, networking, and applying to jobs. We're not going to get through like the whole job process, right? Probably because that's like a whole thing, like applying applications all the way to getting hired. But we're just trying to help you to get your foot in the door, break in. So, and then we'll open it up to the audience, even if we get through the whole script somehow magically. So let's jump right in. The first question that I have, and this is for all three of you, please, in any order you want. Could each of you tell us the story of how you landed your first job?
I'll go first. So my first job, I was a student at Rochester Institute of Technology, and I was frantically searching for an internship. Um, I was really busy with a lot of things. I applied all over the place, but what really helped me was Jessica Bayless, a professor there, knew some people at PlayStation and threw my name in the ring for an internship program they had. And finally, I managed to nail that interview. I became an intern at PlayStation, and then they liked me so much they hired me on as a full-time mid-level employee straight from there. Um, so yeah, that was more or less how I got my first job.
Right. I'll go. Um, so I fell into the game industry by accident. I always loved the idea of making games. I always wanted to do that someday. Growing up, I had no concept of that there even was a game industry. I mean, someone obviously had to make the games that I played. I assume they were all in Japan somewhere. I didn't know. We didn't have game programs. I'm old enough that I predate the game programs that specifically, game specific majors. Those did not exist. Um, so I had no idea. My first job out of college was working on medical databases as a programmer. And there was this one game that I played a lot, an online trading card game that I played on my breaks. I got to, and I was very involved in the community. I would post on forums. I would write strategy articles. I got to know the devs just kind of, over time. And then, there was this one point where I was on a business trip that actually took me to the city where the developers were. And so I kind of worked out with them to just, kind of meet them for lunch or something. Um, it ended up being kind of like a job interview. That it's like, yes, I would actually be interested in this kind of thing. They turned me down because I was very much mid-level programmer by that time, and they were hiring for junior and senior, and I was like right in the middle and hit that brick wall in the middle. And then a couple of years later, they just sent me an email out of the blue on some like random Tuesday or something that was like, "Hey, Ian, we still think you're cool. You don't have to interview or anything, but we've got another opening that would fit you really well. Would you like a job?" And I'm just like, I will have to get back to you on this, but that's kind of how it happened for me. Everyone's breaking in story is unique, so I mean, this is not typical. No, there is no typical here.
So
So I also went to RIT. Graduated in 2010, and within like a month of graduating, I got hired at a local studio. Um, but after 6 months, I got laid off uh, and moved to Seattle and tried to re-break into games, and that didn't work out very well. um, Supposedly, Seattle is notoriously hard to get your foot in the door, or at least it was, a few years ago. Um, but after 2 years there, I got rehired by my original first job, and moved back across the country and have been working in games ever since. So,
that's awesome. So something that interesting. Kat and Luna, you both went to RIT, and Ian, you're from a slightly different generation, so you had a different experience breaking in, and you used the word accidentally. Something that I wanted to kind of build on was that a lot of people, even today, even with the schools out there, they still don't really know what it is to make games and how to get into like anything about making games. They don't even know where to start. So if someone came to you and said, "Where do I start?" How would you answer that?
All right. Well, I'll say, if someone's just asking where do I start, usually I would start a discussion with them to say, all right, um, how much do you know? Yeah. Do you know anything about what kind of job roles and responsibilities you're interested in? Do you know that you have any relevant skills? Is there a particular type of position you're looking for? If the answer is no, then the first thing to do is figure that out. Do your homework and figure out the difference between programming, design, art, production, QA, audio, and at least at some fundamental level, understand the differences between those things, and then figure out, and then your next step after that is figure out, okay, which one of these things actually interests you and that you have skills that overlap, and then you can go from there.
Yeah, the question you fundamentally need to answer is, why do I want this? Because if you understand the reason for your motivation, that'll help you guide yourself towards what it is about it you want to work on.
and loving games helps. I think that's like a pretty good starting point. But if you're here, you probably already like games a lot. So.
Yeah, I mean, all of you touched a little bit on definitely starting with a love for games makes a ton of sense. But how do you actually find out those differences between those different disciplines? Like building off to learn what you might like because you've never designed a game or never programmed a game, you might not know how to find out what those differences are.
Well, there's a lot of options available to you today, much more than there were in the past. There are a lot of tools available out there to make video games with that are fairly approachable. Unity, Unreal, Game Maker. These tools, each have their ups and downs. I'm not going to push one or the other here. Um, but going through some tutorials, they're going to walk you through a large number of different parts of making games. You're going to have to import some art so that you can use that as an opportunity to make your own art. You're going to have to program some gameplay so you can use that as an opportunity to figure out if programming is something you even want to do. And some tools like Unreal have access to visual scripting languages like Blueprint, which is a really common tool for designers to use in designing their gameplay. So take advantage of the work other people have already done. Um, Trying to go from scratch here is a mess. And then there's always the traditional mediums too. You can always make a board game. That's a great first exercise. Make a game of rules that's just like a physical activity and have you and your friends play it. Um, that's how a lot of prototyping is. So
Communities, online communities, in-person communities centered around games, is also really good because you're just spending a lot of time soaking up knowledge from the people that you're surrounding yourself with.
I'm gonna say game jams. Um, Global Game Jam coming up this weekend. Some places it's already started. It may sound, if you haven't heard the term before, a game jam is just an event, a fixed time event where people come together, generally in groups, to make games from scratch in a short period of time, typically around 48 hours. If that sounds impossible, that's because it mostly is. And that removes a lot of the pressure. It sounds like, oh, geez, I don't even have the skills to make a game in 4 years. How could I make one in a weekend? This sounds like a expert level thing, but really it's not. Really, it's most of these are meant to be beginner level exercises. And because it is such a high bar, that removes the pressure to perform because everyone knows you're going to fail hard anyway. So you can just have fun with it. Um, so just show up for a game jam, get involved with a team. Generally these things don't require any prior knowledge or experience. um, and you'll find out pretty quickly when your team starts talking about what it is they're going to build, what kinds of things you can contribute to. And I tell people, even if you have no skills at all, you can still contribute to a development team. You can still, once they have a playable version of the game, you can still play it, tell them why it sucks, tell them if something breaks. Any idiot can do that.
I have
You can
seen
do,
children show up at these events and be super helpful. Like
yeah.
anyone can do this. The bar for entry is really low.
Right. Yep. I mean, you can always do donut and coffee runs to keep the rest of your team fueled. And yeah, I mean, on that statement, I mean, my daughter is, she did her first game jam at 5 years old. Yeah, you probably have skills that are greater than a 5-year-old girl, and that's not to say that she, was terrible or anything. She was awesome. She's actually doing Global Game Jam with me and a team of like 7 others this year. We actually just had our kickoff meeting before this, and she's done like 12 game jams already. But yeah, I mean, you really, the bar for entry is really really low, and even if you can barely contribute anything, just being in that area, and seeing what other people do, and you'll learn very quickly what different parts need to be done to make games and what kinds of skills are needed, and that will push you in the right direction. Um,
Yeah, that's wonderful. You can also help by just playtesting people's games and giving them feedback. That's a great way to exercise your design skills, and just be helpful. Um, so now let's say I go to a game jam and I try a bunch of things and I find out I like everything. I like making art. I like doing design. I like coding. Do I need to focus to get a job? Do I have to focus or can I do everything? What do I do?
Well, it depends on you have to start at that point setting some goals for yourself because you need the ability to, turn what is a really good dream into a pathway to actually achieving that, right? And so there are some roles where you get to do absolutely everything. They're usually on indie teams, smaller teams where there's a lot of creative control of each contributor. And that exists. If you want to have there are benefits to being on an indie team, but there are also downsides like instability. And if you want to have the stability of something like a AAA job, then you need to start focusing on AAA jobs are all highly specialized. So you need to pick one thing. Even if you like everything, you got to pick one thing and get good enough to be hired at it. Um, and the thing is, you may go from like, don't think that you're deciding now, oh, I'm going to be AAA forever. Oh, I'm going to be indie together. The nice thing is, there's a lot of flexibility between these different jobs. So start by just putting a goalpost out there for yourself and specializing as much as you need to hit that goalpost.
Yeah. I would say, yeah, I would add, usually when you do a game jam, one of the things that I tell people if they're like, well, I'm not sure where I want to specialize, game jams are actually pretty good for that. You just, if in that case, what I tell people is do a game jam and do it solo so that you have to do all the things. You don't have a team backing you up. And then when you do all the things, you pay attention to how each thing makes you feel. Some of these things, you're just going to be going through the motions. You're going to do, you're going to do the bare minimum you need to get it done because it has to get done. And then there's other parts that you're like, oh, I can't wait to get to this part. Right. And that'll give you some pretty big signals about which area or areas your passion is in. I do occasionally meet someone who really does legitimately have passions for all the different areas and they don't want to pick one. I also say, so there's three patterns. There's the people who want to be like hyper specialized. There's the people who want to be a generalist within a single discipline. There's definitely room for that at all levels. There's people who are dual class, like, I want to be a programmer and a designer. There are actually specific roles for just about every pair. Like if you want to do mostly design with a little bit of programming, that's called technical designer. You look for jobs with that. If you want to do a mostly programming with a little design, that's called gameplay programmer. You want to do mostly programming with a little bit of art, graphics programmer. Right.
I would not. Graphics programming is like
Well, okay,
low-level engineering.
Well, okay, that's fair, but I mean, you're still doing something that's aesthetic, right? Having some, right, or doing lots of art with a little bit of programming. Technical artist is a thing. So it's like there are all of these hybrid roles, and then there's also like the programmer's programmer role was like I want to do programming for programmers and more programming, and that's called engine programmer. Or I want to do programming for other people. I want to be a programmer who wants to spend most of my time with non-programmers. Well, that's called a tools programmer. Um, so so there are a lot of hybrid roles too. And if you're dual class specifically, the trick is just to figure out what is the specific name of the thing that combines those two things, and those are the jobs you look for. And then there's the jack of all trades that that does a little everything. Like Luna said, indie teams can do that. Even on AAA, I think those people do have some value. It's just you need to pick one spot to get yourself hired into, and then once you're on that team, you get to be the liaison between different departments. Where it's like, oh, they're the programmer who actually knows how to speak design and art and audio and can keep that communication flowing. It's a huge value add to the team. But it's very hard to get hired on that basis. It's something where you have to just kind of sneak the rest of your skills in.
A lot of game directors have worked on nearly every role.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think the high level, something you said earlier in that, Ian, was that stress testing and finding out what is really speaking to you is a really good idea to kind of figure out whether that's actually the thing that you really want to do or if you just kind of like it. I do want to skip ahead a little bit. So let's say you decide on a discipline. Let's say I want to get an entry level job as a designer or a programmer or as an artist. And we talked about some things you can start doing to building your skills, like doing a game jam. But how do I know which skills to really build? Like, how do I know if I want to get a job as an artist, say, how do I build those skills to actually land the job? Because you could definitely draw, but that may not be the specific thing you needed to be doing.
So at least from my own experience, if you are interested in doing art for games, just having like a general interest in art in general from a young age, like helps, I guess, because it's kind of, I mean, there are people who absolutely start doing art stuff later in life, but building that skill, since you were a child certainly helps. Um, when it comes to like just building skill, um, and taking classes in different disciplines. I mean, as far as like games go, most all of the art games is digital, so taking digital art classes, um, getting a tablet, um, and messing around in like free art programs. Um, there's a bunch out there. Um, yeah. Um,
So,
once
so
again,
just
like,
to ask, do you mean like general skills as opposed to like just honing in on game art skills? Is that what you mean by that?
yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that you can definitely do at that stage is you should start talking to people of the discipline and job you want to have. That is a really good time to start asking them what they think are the skills that you should work on. Because the answer is this is going to be a specialized answer for your situation and your goals. So I don't think we have the time to give you all, like, I could spend 30 minutes explaining the skill set required to become an engineer because it is a large skill set. Um, and I could spend probably 30 minutes talking about what you'll need to do to pass a design interview. Um, these are not small tasks. So the best thing to do is to start finding some people, maybe, random panelists you've seen before, and reaching out to them and asking if they have time to answer a few questions. Most people in the industry are fairly friendly. And there are big Twitter communities for almost every discipline that are usually more than willing to answer your questions.
I would also say, by all means, if there are classes that are directly relevant to your interests, absolutely take them. If the classes that you're taking are not specifically games classes being taught by people with games, the professor may not know anything about games. So connecting the dots of the content of this class to how to use it in a game is going to be left to you. Um, but don't rely on classes alone. Even if you're majoring in a game development related degree, it's not going to teach you everything. One of the biggest things that I need to get a lot of students over is this idea of you don't have to ask permission to learn something on your own. Um, and then the other thing is just make games. The more games you make, the more you will build the skills that are actually used in making games. So don't wait for, that's the mistake I see a lot of people say, like, well, I haven't taken any classes in making games yet, so I shouldn't do it. What if I do it wrong? It's like, no, get out there and do it. Make your mistakes when there's no stakes for it.
Lots of people are afraid of building bad habits, but I'll let you in on a little secret, and it's that the entire industry has bad habits.
Yes.
Those are wonderful answers. Thanks all of you. I'll add a little tidbit, which is that you can also just compare yourself to the job listing. As simple as that sounds, if you're trying to get hired for a specific job and you see a lot of job postings for, technical designer, if that's what you want to be, compare yourself to it. Line up yourself to the bullets, compare your resume. Do you hit all those bullets? Where are you weak? That could be an opportunity for you to improve. But sometimes those bullets are pretty subjective feeling, like they're like soft skills. And if that's the case, how do you know what the bar is? Because the bar for a soft skill is fuzzy, right? So how do I know if I'm good enough?
Think
Well,
a lot.
go ahead.
All right. I think a lot of times the answer is if you're on the fence and you hit most of the bullet points and you're not sure about the others, apply and see. You've got people who are heavily experienced hiring managers who are probably doing the same thing that you're doing with 20 more years experience, who are going to look at you and be able to make that call. So just let them. It's-
Yeah. And on that note, getting a mock interview is a super great way to get feedback, especially like a lot of people are afraid to have their friends interview them because it's like, well, my friend isn't trained in the position, so what would they know? And it's like, well, they know more than not having done a mock interview at all, right? Just being in that, almost every student. So I work a lot with students and trying to get them into interview shape. And almost every student I've had has had a terrible first mock interview. And I'm always really happy when that happens because usually it means that their first real interview doesn't stink. Because the answer is your first interview probably will be bad. You'll probably make some mistakes. It's okay. You're getting used to it. By the third or fourth, you'll be really used to the process, and you can focus more on the things that matter. And you'll know what to look for. You'll know what they're looking for more. Um, so even just having a friend ask you questions related to the thing you want to practice. If it's a soft skill, like say it's giving feedback, ask a friend to rate some feedback you've given.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I like that a lot because essentially you're trying to turn something that's subjective into something closer to objective. I mean, you can never get a perfect scale, but it's a really great idea to try and measure your improvement, especially if you do it over and over again and you find that number's going up. But part of what I'm getting at here kind of crosses into sort of portfolio land, which is very subjective as well. Portfolios are, it's not the same thing as saying, can you do XYZ to specifically do the job? It's saying, you're trying to show off your best work in a context, your best artwork, your best games, your best sound. So well, actually, let's back up for a second and talk portfolios. What is a portfolio? Because, it comes up a lot in job search and stuff. And, is it important? Do you need to make one?
yes.
Great. Okay.
I'm gonna go with a portfolio is a collection of evidence that you are capable performing the job you are applying for. At the end of the day, the goal of your portfolio is not to show off how cool you are. It's not to show off things. I mean, it should be show off because that's going to help towards your main goal. But your main goal is to convince the person hiring you that you have the skills needed to perform the job they're hiring you to do and that you're the best applicant for that job. You know, the entire application is that your resume, your portfolio, your cover letter, all of that should be focused around convincing the person in front of you that you can do the job. And so portfolios tend to be show offy because, they're an opportunity for you to do that. When a person looks at a portfolio, what they're looking for is what really sparkles about this candidate. What really cool things can they do? And what really cool things can I ask them questions about during the interview? That's the purpose of a portfolio.
As far as art goes, portfolios are absolutely essential to getting a job. So, and it's I mean, it's your body of work. It's it can be stuff that, it can be uh client work that you've done in the past, or personal work. And usually it's good to include a little bit of both. But yeah, without a portfolio, you don't really have anything to show as far as art goes. So
I would also say just especially as a student where you're the classic question, right? How do I get experience without the job? How do I get the job without the experience? The portfolio is that gap that bridges the two. That lets right remember that most game companies they're hiring based on skills. They're like, we are trying to make an awesome game. We want to hire people who can help us make awesome games. You're we don't care what school you came from. We don't care what classes you took. We want to know, can you help us make awesome games? And your portfolio is the place where you can show evidence that you could help them make awesome games because, hey, I've made these awesome games in the past. It's a way to show what you're capable of, and that's really the point, because It's to show, yes, I do actually have some experience, even if it's not industry experience.
One exception to this, though, that I do want to point out, and a caveat, is that a lot of programming jobs, specifically, the more programming jobs, um, they tend to not expect portfolios. And at that point, it's up to you, a judgment call, if the amount of time spent building the portfolio is worth the benefit it will provide to you. Most cases, I would say the answer is no, it is not worth the time. You should focus more on your engineering skills than spending the time to build a portfolio, even if it's, using something like WordPress. Um, the best portfolio an engineer has is a GitHub link, uh, but that's about it.
And I would count a GitHub repository as a programmer portfolio. Um, I also I also think there can be some value to having, like, for any GitHub thing, it's like, yes, here's my entire project. You can download the entire source tree, including like a few code samples that are like, here are some specific parts that I want you to look at that are particularly clever bits of code that I wrote. Just so that you don't have to hunt down and open some random file that may or may not be my best work within this project.
I love that. And what you're touching on is like a portfolio, if in the broader sense, looks different based on your discipline, right? It could be a GitHub for a programmer, it could be an art station for an artist. For designer, it might be somewhere in the middle. For a graphic designer, you're probably going to be judged by the graphic design of your website, right? Whereas as a designer, I don't really have to worry about that as much as long as it's not like, totally offensive in terms of how it looks. I'm going to be judged more on my design thoughts and thinking that I'm expressing through my projects as well as the quality of the projects. So to think about it that way is that it's just a way to extend your resume, which is a fact sheet and usually limited. So why not, if they're interested to learn more about you, give them what they want, right? Um, so,
Oh, oh,
oh,
that brings up the most important thing. If what you would put on your portfolio would make them think less of you in any way, I'm not even just talking socially, but I mean, like, if you're like, yeah, this work is like subpar, don't put it on there. Why are you showing off your not best work? That's not the point of a portfolio. No one cares about, okay, well, for certain positions, people will care about the amount of work you've done, but for entry and breaking in positions, they just care about like the quality you're capable of. You should have multiple entries, right? That shows that you're not just a one-trick pony. But if something's bad, don't put it on there because that's what they'll remember.
I have a question from the chat real quick. I can hop in
Oh.
here. Somebody asked, is school a requirement? I've been a hobbyist for a while.
No, plenty of people get hired into the game industry without game specific schooling. I will say there are certain disciplines where having at least a 4-year bachelor's degree will help, just because you're going to be going up against other people who have one. But at the same time, it is possible, if you are the type of person who really will be able to do a lot of diligent self-study, who can motivate yourself, you have a lot of initiative, you're a self-starter, or whatever buzzword you want to describe this, and and you just spend 4 years full-time constantly just teaching yourself how to code and coding up a storm, you're probably going to be a much stronger programmer than someone who's got a 4-year CS degree. um and it'll just be up to you, and your work, the quality of your work may be enough to show that. um that said, I do usually recommend at least get a bachelor's degree in something. Doesn't even have to be related to your discipline, just because 20 years from now, when you get laid off in your mid to late career and you're the one person applying for senior level jobs that doesn't have a degree, it does work against you. And it's just easier to get when you're young, but it's not an absolute hard requirement.
Goes for art too. You don't need to go to school necessarily, as long as your portfolio shows a strong body of work. No, school is not required. And a lot of people are actually opting for online classes rather than going to like a 4-year university nowadays. So
Yeah, the one caveat I will add to all of this though is there are some companies that use automatic HR things and they will put in like has a degree as a field. Um that is a downside of our society. There's not much you can do there. I'm not saying you should spend however many thousands of dollars to get a degree to get past those. I'm just saying you're going to have a slightly harder time than an applicant that has a degree because
There are cheaper ways to get degrees too. Like, if the only stopping point to you isn't the time, it's just the money, get your associate's degree at a community college where it's cheap, and then that'll let you come into a 4-year degree 2 years in already. And let you skip past all the gen ed stuff. Some schools are like, you don't have to go to a high powered school. A state school where you get in-state tuition is fine. That type of thing. And most of what you're going to be learning about games is probably going to happen outside of your classes anyway.
There are many paths.
so
Yeah,
I
so
would also like
it's.
to
Oh, sorry.
I would also like to address a question that was asked because I think it's good in the Twitch chat. Foxy asks for advice as a writer with no industry experience in their 30s, but experience in a degree in the field otherwise. And the problem of not qualifying necessarily for internships because you're not a student, but every other job requiring experience, and then do that, but now add COVID, right? So my advice to you for trying to get in there is to basically, I know that, yeah, COVID does make networking harder. Networking is going to be one of the best ways that you can slide in at that point. And then the flip side of that, though, without networking, is to look very carefully at associate level positions because a lot of them at certain companies do not require any sort of degree to get into or any previous experience. So associate positions, you probably are qualified for getting. Um, also, we started doing a new thing on my team called assistant positions, which are designed exactly for your scenario. They are essentially internships, but for people who are not in college, so we can legally or whatever do them. Um, and still apply to internships. Sometimes people are okay with hiring interns that aren't in college. Um, it's it's a hard situation to be in. So the answer is unfortunately, if you want to accomplish this, you're going to have to try a lot of different things. And hopefully one of them will get you in.
I'd say for game writing in particular, that's a really weird subfield of things, in that it works by kind of different rules from a lot of other things. Writers very often are solitary with, like, they are the sole writer within their team, for example. With writing, like Luna said, networking, right? Because game writing is such a solitary position, audio is like this too. Game writers on their own have very tight knit communities. So find like Facebook groups and things like that that are specific to game writing, that have a bunch of professional writers in there. Get involved with things like that, because it is a really tight knit community, and there are a lot of people there that can help you. The other thing is, make games yourself. Twine is a very common entry point for writers because it doesn't really require much in the way of coding, but you want to be taking those the traditional linear writing skills, and be able to apply them to games. Like, can you write a branching narrative? Can you write a non-linear narrative? Because that's something that, if you're used to writing things like fantasy novels, it's a bit of a shift mentally. And again, this could be game jams, just personal passion projects, but start writing for the medium. And you can do that. The barrier to entry with Twine is very, very low. So you can just be doing that. You don't need a development team. And just kind of cut your writing skills on that. Then you'll have a nice portfolio of playable writing samples that'll give people a pretty good idea of the kinds of writing you do.
Yeah, those are all wonderful answers. Yeah, something else to also consider is that, degrees, because game design in particular, but also game development as a whole, is not super formalized yet in its education, and we're still kind of figuring it out piece by piece. Ian knows this very well as an educator. It's not like getting an MD where you have to learn XYZ in a specific way. And the good thing about that is that means that if you learn stuff on your own, you have a great shot of competing with people. So I want to move forward with this competing kind of mindset because it's not the funnest thing, but the reality is that when you're applying to a job, you're competing against other people for that job. So one of those things we mentioned was a degree. We talked about a little bit of portfolio, but in general, how do you stand out from the crowd when there's 1,000 people, which is sometimes the case for an entry level job at a big company? When there's 1,000 people applying, how do you stand out?
This is gonna sound really simple and kind of crazy. Um, Answer the questions on your test correctly. Yeah, like, I really love when I have 2 great applicants I have to choose between. The reality of the situation is most of the applicants I deal with, um, at least, previous experiences in engineering, it hasn't been a hard choice. There are people who can do the job, and there are people who can't, and we get a ton of experience of people who just don't have the skills, and they don't have the ability to do the job. Um, and so we pick the one person who applied who did. Um, and that doesn't mean there won't be those scenarios where you're competing with other people and you shouldn't try your best. But start with just meeting the skill set and you can probably get a job if you put in enough applications to different places.
I would say, yeah, it's like, yeah, don't be intimidated by the figure of like, oh, 1,000 people applied for this job. Let's break that down a little bit. Like, okay, this is a completely fictional, contrived example, right? But so, 1,000 people applied to this job. Okay, 500 of them get thrown away by your automated HR system because they're just bots. They're not even people, um, and you're just filtering those out. So you've got maybe, so then you've got a bunch of humans that are applying to this thing. Once someone goes through the human, resumes, a bunch of them just do not have the skills at all. Like, you list on there, this is a Unity C# programming position, and there's a whole bunch of people that just do not list Unity and C# in the skills section of their resume. Okay, out you go. So they just get auto eliminated either by the first person who looks at it or by a machine that's automating that work. So those all go away. So the people who just don't have the skills at all, that shouldn't have even been applying, they just get thrown out. Now you're down to like a pretty small pool of people. Of those, some of them are just going to make horrendous mistakes in their in their application. Like, their resume is going to be filled with spelling errors, or they're not going to have a portfolio when one of them was specifically asked for. You know, Things like that. So it's like, okay, you might have had the skills, you might have been in the running, but you screwed up right at the beginning because you just didn't bother to proofread your stuff or have anyone else proofread it. Okay, out you go. Might not be fair, but that's it's like when you've got too many applicants, you need to find very easy ways to throw a bunch of them out, because it's just time consuming to look through these. You'll get people that completely blow the interview. And then at the end, it comes down to like 3 people that, maybe it's 3 people that have the skills, they've got the team fit, they're not axe murderers. And at that point, it just comes down to kind of this random, well, this one person happened to have this one additional skill that happens to be good for our team, that's completely no fault of their own. They happen to stand out from the other ones. And if you're getting to the final round interviews consistently enough, eventually that one standout thing will be yours.
We have a bunch of questions coming in from the chat now. I'm going to kind of work my way down here. The first one
I think
is...
Kat had a response, though.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
If you wanted to jump in.
That's okay. As far as art goes, including your own personal work, in addition to work that represents the kind of job that you're going for, is good, just so the people that are involved in the hiring process see that you are working on stuff outside of your day job, or it shows your own kind of personal expression. Certainly doesn't hurt to have in a portfolio.
I love that. Sorry, Noah, if you want to grab the next question.
Oh no, sorry again for interrupting. Yeah, so we have, what would y'all say are the most efficient ways to develop your individual skill set? I think we covered this a little bit before, but I don't know if anyone has anything they'd like to add there.
I think it's good because we didn't really talk about efficient ways to develop skills. We just talked about, standing out. So yeah, if anyone wants to kind of dive deeper into that specific thing.
I'm going to pick one topic, go over it real fast. Engineering. Uh, so if you want to become a better engineer, the way to do that is by solving real problems and studying the tools used to solve those problems. Data structures and algorithms are tools, and so memorizing what they are is like 1/8 of the application. The other 7/8 is actually practicing building things with data structures. So the unfortunate answer that a lot of students don't realize until they're almost out the door in college is you have to build things to get the experience needed to problem solve, and you need to focus on your problem solving. And your entire interview will be problem solving because that's what your entire job will be if you get the job.
Yeah, I would say make games, make games, make games. Um, and the other thing, though, that because of the phrasing of this question, it can be problematic. There's a fine line between I want to learn as much as I can, as fast as I can, so I can get as powerful as I possibly can. Where it's like, with experience, the power will come. Versus I want to put in the bare minimum amount of effort it would take to get a job. If you're thinking along the lines of what's the smallest amount of effort I can do in order to get the minimal amount of skills, then you might actually rethink whether the game industry is a good place for you, because it's not really a place where people do the minimum. We kind of try to go for the opposite of that. And if you just want to phone it in, on a regular basis, there are a lot of industries that are happy to have you. Games will crush you.
Yeah, there's no efficient way to get better at art, really. Either it's kind of a lifelong process. You just when you think you're like, I'm figuring this whole art thing out, um, it kicks your butt. So just keep doing it because you love it. But efficiency, I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's fair. I assume this person was asking in good faith, but a really good point to mention. There's no shortcuts. I'll take the questions directly from the chat because we actually have a bunch. So the next one that I have here is, do you have any recommendations for finding places to apply for internships?
Well, if your school has a career center, and especially if they have a games program, that can be a good place to start. Follow a lot of game companies on Twitter. They often, when they have any kind of internships that go out, or any kind of job postings at any level that go out, often they'll tweet about it. There is a game jobs hashtag that you can just follow on there, even if you don't have a Twitter account yourself. I know Twitter is like a cesspool of toxicity in a lot of places, but at least just lurking there and watching what other things do, follow a bunch of companies that you would want to work for. Also, just about every game company has its own corporate website, just the name of the company.com usually. And most of those have a jobs or careers section right off the main page. Just bookmark a bunch of those and then go back to them periodically and see what comes up. If they have internships, they'll post them. And of course, the large companies like Blizzard, which I'm sure Luna can talk about, have dedicated internship programs with very clear instructions and stuff.
Yeah, we are hiring literally constantly. Just this morning, we released a new set of titles for an unannounced project that includes the very rare associate level design position.
Um, Sites like Work with Indies, or I mean, even like ArtStation or LinkedIn or any of those like more common uh, job search websites are good to follow. Um, follow your favorite companies on social media. Sometimes they'll make a post to be like, hey, we're doing summer internships or winter internships or whatever. Um, Also, there's a really great site called the Game Dev Map. Um, or it used to be good. I don't know if it still is. I haven't been there in a while, but it's a map of the world, and there are little like pips in different cities, and it's just like a list of every studio, or at least most of the studios in that city, and just go through and see studios that are near you. Go to their website and see what's going on, and also just cold calling. Like when I was in college, I emailed the studio that was making the Venture Brothers, and I was like, "Do you do summer internships?" And they got back to me, and they're like, "Yes." So sometimes just reaching out and asking people results in good things. So yeah.
Yeah, and,
Also,
and know the terms also, like search intern, associate, junior. It's not always going to be called the exact same thing, so make sure you're just kind of keeping your options open and trying everything. And look, in spring and early and late winter because they do tend to pop up more in summer. Sorry, someone else was saying something.
I was just also going to add, for if you're looking for things locally, if there is a game dev meetup, at least during non-pandemic conditions, many cities do have like a game developer meetup there, and people will be talking about either looking for work or looking to hire very often at those things. Some places even give people like little stickers to put on their shirts saying whether they're doing one or the other.
Awesome. So the next question I have from the chat is it possible to work completely remotely or just starting out? I'm interested in art, music, and game design. If I had to pick, I'd say 2D art.
Uh, yes, caveat. It's really hard. Most places are still not comfortable with hiring people fully remote somehow, despite this pandemic. And the people they are comfortable with having fully remote are people they know have experience doing the job. There's a lot you learn in person, unfortunately. Um, and a lot of company like I would love to tell you yes, because the answer is there are companies out there. It's just they're kind of hard to find right now. So you're gonna struggle.
Yeah, that's been really disappointing to me because I've been full time remote for I've done remote work for like the past 10 years, so this is old to me. When the pandemic came, a lot of people were freaking out. It's like, oh, how do I even do anything online? And I'm just like, oh, this again, great, I'm in my element. And I found it challenging to find places that really are fully remote and mean it. Um, but yeah, there are places that do exist. I would say there are a lot of companies that are grudgingly doing remote right now because they have no choice and they just cannot wait to get back to in person. So I think even with places that do have remote jobs, sometimes they'll have this like remote for now with the expectation that at some point you will move here. Um, once it's safe to do so. So you will find a fair number of those. Um, and then there are some that are just like, yes, we are fully on board with remote, or we have always been a remote studio even before the pandemic, so we're going to remain such. Mostly, it's just a matter of um, reading the job posting. Most job postings these days do specify, um, or or if they don't specify, just send them a letter of just send them a quick email saying I'd like to know more information about this as far as is this remote.
So I've been working fully remote for a year and a half, a little bit over a year and a half, um, doing 2D art, and it's completely possible. It's I find it pretty great. It yeah, there are certain problems with it. Most notably, like studios sometimes will not offer benefits or like paid vacation um, for fully remote positions. That's becoming less common, but yeah, I don't know. It's doable. It takes a lot of organization and like self. Um, uh, you need a lot of organization and scheduling for yourself to kind of maintain it, but it's doable. Totally.
I did think of one other thing that I'd want to add. If you're interested in fully remote positions, um, it will help a lot if you have some experience on fully remote teams. So, like when you sign up to do a game jam, do it remotely. If you have any opportunities whatsoever, either with class projects or passion projects, to work on a team where everyone is distributed, go ahead and opt to do that, even if you have the option to do some in-person work instead. If you can come to a company and be like, yes, I have done, these things, you can even put on your portfolio. It's like, here's some games I worked on. This was done on a team before, fully remote. And if all of your things are like remote, then that makes it much easier for you to make the case that you can hire me as a junior, and I know how to work remote.
I would also say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is there's actually, a fair amount of opportunity for you to do commissions or contracts that are remote, right? And it's a shorter term thing. It's not going to be like a long term thing, but it is an opportunity to make some money and work with someone across the country.
I would
That's
say
true.
in my, oh, oh, I would say in my experience, most of the remote, like short-term contract work, like freelance stuff, goes to people who are more senior. Because so and I've also found that most, like the vast majority, I've been a freelancer for quite some time, um, and I'd say probably like 99% of the work that I get as a freelancer comes from people who I have worked with before. So like the best case situation for freelancing is like, I got a full-time job in the game industry working on a team, and then that company imploded, everyone got laid off, and now I've got a team. Instead of having one team with 30 people on it that I've worked with before, now I have 30 teams with one people on them that I've worked with before. And whenever any of those people are on a team that say, oh, we have some overflow work here, we need to bring on some external contractors, they can be like, hey, I worked with a guy. That's where most of my contracts came from. So I say, if you are interested in doing freelancing in particular, highly recommend doing full-time work at a studio or two first. And and then cross your fingers, in weirdly enough, that the whole thing, that the company goes under and everyone scatters.
I do want to. You're not wrong, Ian, but I do want to just mention there's a distinct difference between design and programming and art there, because for design it definitely leans more senior contract, but for programming and art you definitely can get entry level and medium gigs more. There's at least more opportunities out there because people are just looking. They're just in dire need for programmers and artists, so all over the place. So just speaking really generally, though, I got another question from the chat. As far as portfolios go, what's more important, more features or greater stability? Greater stability. I'm not sure what that means, actually. Maybe one of you could take a stab at what do you think that means. More features or greater stability? Also my choice. If you want to clarify in the chat, feel free.
I'm guessing this is an engineer, and they're talking about, should I make sure that my game that is featured there has fewer, should I spend more time bug hunting or more time adding features? I would say, if you're a programmer,
Bug hunting.
You'll
You'll think back 5 years later and go, oh, I should have done bug hunting. Speaking as a person who did all the features and then went, well, the skills you really need to learn to be an engineer, you learn by fixing bugs. So, whoops.
Also, just like, in general, not just programming, small, polished is better than try to make the bigger thing, because realistically, you're going to get a job and you're going to make a giant thing you never could have made on your own anyway. So it's like, what's the point? What are you trying to show off by yourself making a giant thing? Just make a really tight, polished little thing.
It takes me 4 weeks to make a quest line. It takes me, or sorry, not 4 weeks, 4 days to make a quest line. It takes me 2 months or so to finish the quest line and like polish it. Like it takes like nearly 10 times as much. That's the hard part, and that's also the part you're mostly going to be doing. And that's the part they're hiring you for. So
I mean, my most generic portfolio advice, which answers like 99% of people's portfolio questions about what should be on there or what I should focus on, is this. Take the job that you want. Figure out what that job title is called. and then look up a bunch of games that are just like already in your Steam library or on your phone or whatever, and click the credits button on the main menu and scroll through the credits until you find the people who have the job title that you want. And now you've got a bunch of names. And then you take those names and you type that with the word game into Google, or game portfolio. And you cyberstalk these people and you figure out where their professional portfolios are, because they probably have one. And then you look at their portfolios and see what is on there, and you look for the common threads. Because it's like, these are people whose portfolios did in fact get them hired. This is the sample, this is survivorship bias at its finest. And if these portfolios got them hired, then that's probably the kind of thing that you want to focus on. If you notice that like all of them had this one particular format or this one particular type of thing, then you're like, oh, I should probably do that thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just for everyone to note, whether you're in the chat or here, we've definitely crossed into the open audience segment. And at this point, the questions are coming a little faster than we can answer them. So I'm going to leave it to the three of you to really answer these. And I'll just rally these questions off one by one, because I want to make sure that these people get their questions answered. So first one, or the next one, is from Naveen. I'm curious if y'all have noticed an oversaturation of sound designers. I'm a sound designer and have recently started trying to break into the industry. It seems like there are a huge number of people trying to get into that specific field. So I don't think any of us are sound designers, but does anyone want to take a crack at it?
No, but I've worked with a lot of different companies at this point. So what I need from you, and I actually worked on audio design. So what I need from you, Naveen, is because I want to answer your question correctly. What do you mean by sound design? What do you do specifically? Because that term, unfortunately, has like 12 different meanings in the industry. Like, do you
Yeah.
make sounds? Do you make sure the sounds are in the right locations? Like, what specifically are you working on?
I think there might be a couple of sound people in the chat, maybe, that might be able to answer that a little bit better.
Oh yeah, actually, it looks like Pete Johnson actually answered. So I'll read out while they're clarifying. I'll read out Pete's answer for everyone, which is, it seems to me there aren't a huge number of sound jobs. Like Ian mentioned earlier, places don't need as many sound people as, say, coders. Or have things changed in the past few years? Question mark. My finger is not as pulse adjacent as it used to be. I got the impression people wanted music jobs more and were hoping to backdoor it through SFX. When I'd see sound jobs state this is not a music position or some such. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, in the meantime, let's see if no, they haven't clarified.
They clarified sound
Oh, they
effects
did.
and Foley work. So okay, so
Right.
for sound creation, yes. The thing is, the problem is not so much that there are so many sound designers, it's that there's so few positions. So definitely keep yourself open to the other jobs that need sound design. If you want to do Foley work and stuff, a lot of the Foley work that gets done in games is the same as the Foley work that gets done for TV. Obviously, there's different nuances, but it'll help you expand your pool to the largest pool that you can reasonably apply to that uses that skill set. And then after you have some jobs, you'll be a lot easier to hire.
I could also add the other way around too. If you have additional games making skills, like I like to do sound work, but I also have coding skills that would qualify me for an entry level coding position. You can broaden the fields that the types of jobs that you're looking for there too. As Luna said at the very beginning of this, right? Once you break in, jobs can be much more fluid once you're in the industry. Especially at like small indie companies where they need everyone to do everything anyway.
Awesome. So I actually went through the chat and I actually was wrong. I thought there was a lot more questions, but it looks like it was a lot of conversation about that question. So if someone had a question that was unanswered that nowhere I missed, do you mind resurfacing it to the front?
I do.
Just reposting
one
it
here. We have somebody asked, do you recommend your own website as a portfolio?
Your own website as a portfolio.
Yes, absolutely.
As opposed to what? Someone else's website?
Do they mean like an art station or something? Maybe I'm not sure. I
think, I mean, places like ArtStation and DeviantArt and like Instagram, like there's no shortage of places to host a portfolio, but having your own kind of like home base, um, I don't know. There's something about it that kind of shows like a je ne sais quoi. I don't really know like how to explain it, but it's nice to see. I guess it's more effort, um, and that is not a bad thing.
On the flip side, though, if you suck at making websites and it will hurt your portfolio, keep that in mind. I think it definitely depends on the position. Like if it's an art position, I think like your advice is phenomenal for that specific case. Um, for something more like design or engineering, like it comes to what's your skill set? Do you have the art skills to make a website that looks good? Be honest with yourself, because you could make something that looks worse than WordPress, and it's just going to hurt your application. Um, so just be realistic about it, um, and how much time you want to put into it. Building a website takes a lot of time.
That's a great
Oh.
point. Yeah, I definitely like started with WordPress and then moved off of it because I needed something, right?
But like if you're asking me which one I'll prefer, I will always look at the applicant that made their own website and it looks good, like it's better, like obviously.
And there are places that you can like host a portfolio, at least as far as art goes. There are places you can host a portfolio that you can even customize a little bit more than like something like an Instagram. Unless you have like, hundreds of thousands of followers, and like that's kind of like a thing that you could add to your resume. Like I have this many followers on social media. Um, it's not gonna hurt. But yeah, there are definitely places where you can like even like making a Tumblr and customizing it however you can is doable.
I would also reiterate that if you do decide to put your portfolio on like a portfolio site, whatever, Wix, Behance, Tumblr, Instagram, whatever, um, because there are so many different ones, take a look at other people's portfolios that are on those sites. Because like I have actually seen some of these that have terrible UX. It's like this is a professional portfolio site, and when I went to visit a person's portfolio who was on there, the very first thing it did was pop up a giant window in front of me, saying like welcoming me to the site and trying to sell me on how wonderful this site is for hosting resumes and would I like to create my own. And I'm like, go away. I just want to see this person's portfolio. And it's like the site itself was trying to sell itself to me more than the content that I came there for. It was just awful. And it's like I felt bad for that person that was hosting their portfolio there, because it's like, this does not make you look good.
Some some job applications will just ask you to upload 5 pieces of your best work, and you don't even have to include a portfolio link. You know, unless they ask you further down the road. Um, Sometimes that's not even a requirement. So as long as you have the work in like a PNG or a JPEG, that'll be fine.
As kind of a follow-up as well, they asked, are using like template websites okay? I suppose like if you had like your own domain but you had like a WordPress running on it, or just like a template of some kind.
I think so. I use one of those websites. So yeah, why not?
Yeah, I don't currently have a portfolio at all, but when I do someday, it probably will be just one of those template websites to save me some time.
Cool. We got a new question in the chat. It's a bit of a different topic. How important is it to be familiar with the products of the specific game studio that you're applying to when breaking into the industry, particularly if you have a lot of applications out?
This is probably going to depend on the role, so you're going to hear several answers here. When it comes to engineering, um, if you know programming, you can, as long as you know like how to program, doesn't matter if you know specific IDEs. Likewise, if you know languages that are at least similar to the language on the application, normally it doesn't matter too much. Like I didn't know Lua going into this job, but I know C and I'm a good programmer, so they're like, yeah, you can pick up Lua in like a couple of days or something. Um, Likewise, a lot of tools, a lot of tools are very bespoke. Like, do you want to apply Blizzard to work on WoW? Well, you're never going to have experience working with WoW Edit because it's a proprietary software. Um, but you could have experience with similar products. Like if you practice with like Unity or Unreal, then you can show that, yeah, I have experience working in a game engine before, right? And working with game engine tools. So as long as you have experience with tools that are at least similar, when it comes to design and programming, that works pretty well. I don't know about art, actually.
So was
Actually,
this
yeah, maybe a clarification here because I think I'm not sure if you asked my choice, you meant products like tools or products like the games they made. Is that what you're going to ask too, Kat? Yeah,
that's exactly what I was going to ask.
yeah. I mean, we could definitely
Flew
answer
over my
both.
head, sorry.
It's still a
Yeah.
great answer for the tools question. Yeah,
Yeah.
we might as well just finish answering tools and then just flip to, you know,
Yeah.
both actually. Okay, great. We have to do both. So you want to let's like do tools and then we'll go through games.
Sure. For art, I mean, the Adobe Creative Suite is pretty standard across the entire industry. There are certain programs, like other art, like 2D art programs, that I've had to learn for specific projects. But I mean, yeah, learning like industry um standard tools is probably a good idea. As far as like the products, like the games that these studios actually make, if you're I mean, it's not necessary, but if you are more familiar with a title from the studio that you're applying to, you're probably going to stand out more than someone who doesn't. Um, it's not a bad thing. So I would say if you have the time, do it. If you if you're sending out a lot of applications and you're kind of like, pressed for time, like pick the one that you are seem to be most interested in and check it out. Or you can watch Let's Plays um, on YouTube or Twitch streams too. If you don't want to like go buying all these games because that's expensive. But there's many ways to check out the products that these studios make for sure.
Yep. Yeah, I was gonna say that there is no expectation that you spend money on pretty much anything during a job search. If a company is demanding that you pay money to buy their game as part of the job interview, that would be really sketchy. Um, but like you said, there's plenty of ways to research a game. You can look up wikis, you can look up let's plays, game reviews, trailers, all kinds of things like that. I would say from a design perspective, it would be, I think, expected that you would at least, between the time when you apply and are told, yes, we would like to have an interview with you, and the moment of your interview, you should be using some time in there to research the studio, the games that they've made, and become at least a little bit familiar. Like, you should at least know what genres they're working in, what kind of licenses they have, if any, things like that, and you don't have to be the world's foremost expert at things, but at least show that you looked it up at some point. Um, and that and that, like, if you have a studio, say, that always works in first-person shooters, that's what they do, then you probably want to be at least a little bit familiar with the genre. At least you don't have to be the world's biggest fan of the genre. That's okay. In fact, it can be very valuable on a development team to have some people that hate the genre so that you can give it to them to play and see if they're having a good time anyway. Um, but like as a designer, especially, like you should be familiar with the kinds of games that you're going to be making, so that you can draw that you can answer those because those are the kinds of questions that you're probably going to get asked on your skills interview. And so you should kind of expect that to come, that these things are going to have a bias towards the kinds of games, or the kinds of games you would be working on. I would say for other roles, it can still be useful to know a little bit about the games that the studio has done, or the game that they're making if that's public. Um, just so that you can be looking through the work that you've done and be thinking about where the parallels are, right? Like if you're an artist and you specifically do fantasy creatures and you're applying for a role on the StarCraft team, well, there's a little bit of a mismatch there in terms of style. But if you say you've done some fantasy and some sci-fi, and you're looking at a StarCraft team, then you could be like, okay, well, I can be looking more at the sci-fi stuff that I've been doing and be bringing that up more in the interview. Same thing with programming, where it's like, if there's certain types of programming problems that come up within a certain genre that you have, and you're like, okay, maybe I've done some tower defense games and I'm applying for a role in a company that's making an RTS. Well, that's not exactly the same, but there's a lot of things that are similar, that are parallel to that now I've got some stories that I can tell about some of the code that I've written that go, that can cross over and that can be relevant to the specific work that I'd be doing at this company.
And also, there are some companies that have been famous in the past for basically requiring you to have played their games, like Blizzard or Riot. And at least for both of those companies, the requirements are turning more into just pluses. It's no longer as strictly the case. The whole industry has realized that's completely dumb. It's just, it lags behind in some parts. So some studios might be different, but I know our team, like I hadn't played WoW in like several years when I applied.
Those are great. Yeah. Someone asked, this is actually flipping into a different topic again. I use Photoshop. Is Illustrator recommended? This is an art specific question.
So it depends on what you need to make. Photoshop and Illustrator do different things, so learning both is good. Yeah, there's lots of tutorials out there on just about everything that you could do with either program. So yeah, get familiar with both if you have time.
Cool. Next question is, hey, any tips for breaking into the game producer role? Actually, go ahead.
No, production is tough because, in some ways, I could describe a producer's job as making sure that the entire team is on budget and on time, which means that production mistakes cost time and money, the two most valuable resources that a development team has. So producer is like the most dangerous position on a team, which means that you go through a lot more scrutiny. Um, Associate producer positions vary a lot in terms of what they're looking for and what your job role would actually be. I've seen some APs that are basically just glorified interns getting coffee for people. Others that are like, no, you're in charge of all the spreadsheets that deal with the scheduling for this entire team. So I think a lot, it goes back to an earlier question we had, which is just look up job postings for the thing you want and see what they're asking for, and then get good at those things. And if you do work on group, definitely I think working on group projects is important for everyone. It's doubly important for production. And be taking on kind of that leadership or that project management role in student group projects, in game jams, things like that.
Yeah, actually, I'll chime in here if that's okay too, which is that as Ian said, it's a very, very loaded term, or as he implied, because like it's used many different ways. Could be more project manager, could be leaning more like executive style producer, which wouldn't be an entry level job. The only way you can really prove your skills is you kind of have to demonstrate that you're super organized, and the term we like is like herding cats, right? So you need to show that you can wrangle a bunch of people, ideally of different disciplines, of different types, of different work styles, and show that you can turn that into something organized, right? So it doesn't even have to be a game. It just has to
You-
be something that, for example, if you are an event runner and you put together a big conference, that's an example of the kinds of skills that might be really cross applicable to being a producer. So to find a way to like prove those skills through your projects, it's a little harder than having a portfolio of just projects, because you need to actually demonstrate that you took it for, you helped the timelines go down, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, that's what I'd focus on.
Yeah. I mean, do you know what group of people are highly unorganized and could really benefit from someone keeping their scope in check? People working on a game jam.
All of us, actually.
Actually, everyone, but
People working on
these are the
games.
ones you can reach.
I love it. Do we have another question in the chat? So we're actually getting to 10. So I would say at this point, we could probably start wrapping it up. And if people have more questions, you're welcome to leave them in the chat. We can post them into the Discord as well. We can continue discussion in Discord in an asynchronous way if people want to just like keep talking and keep asking questions, and the community can work together to answer. But before we leave, I wanted to kind of like give everyone, each of our panelists, first of all, a huge round of applause. If everyone can give a digital clap. And then secondly, I wanted to give each of them an opportunity, just like if you wanted to like leave with any sort of generalized statement, any general advice for the person out there who's lost and wants to kind of get their foot in the door. Whether it's like a younger version of you or just like a generalized person.
I would say just the one piece of general career advice I give people is that it's never too late to change your mind. If you're 40 or 50 and thinking about getting into games, you can do that. If you're 20 and thinking of getting into games, but you're worried that about what if I burn out and have to change entire careers to something else when I'm 30, it's okay to do that too. The average person has 3 different careers, not jobs, careers in their working life. A lot of people fall into or out of the game industry. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. And it's very, very possible in both directions, and that's perfectly fine. It is all part of your life's journey.
Cool. Anyone else?
There was a talk that author Neil Gaiman gave a few years ago, probably closer to a decade ago, where he talks about how when you're getting hired for a job, um, there are 3 key things that are important: doing good work, getting the work done fast, and being likable. And you only actually need 2 of the 3 things, because if you have 2 of them, the other one will be excused. And I I remember hearing that during my time in Seattle when I was having trouble getting my foot back in the door, and it really helped. So a little nugget of knowledge.
This goes for any position, but identify the problem you're trying to solve right in the moment. You are working on your resume. What is the purpose of your resume, right? And the answer ultimately is to get a job, but like specifically, like, oh, it's to generate questions for the person to ask you. And if you can figure out what your problem is, then you have something you can work toward. That's an attainable goal now, right? Now that it's a problem. Um, I spent a lot of time just throwing things out into the void because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have anything specific to do. But once I had a plan, things went a lot better.
Well, I love that. Thank you all for giving those closing statements. So, of course, we just kind of scratched the surface. This is a massive topic. We probably couldn't cover it if we just stood. We're here for 10 hours. So I would really encourage everyone to go join the Rock Game Dev Discord if you haven't already. Please post your questions there. Actually, Noah and Sam, what's a good channel for that or BC if you're in the chat somewhere? What's a good channel for people posting these kinds of questions? If we don't have a career advice channel, do we? Like IGM does. We should have one.
Yeah, it seems like right now we do have the various like discipline channels. So help me code, write, compose.
Help me job, right? We
Yeah,
need something
help
like that.
me, help me job.
Help me job. We should add something like that, and then people can post there, or just post in general. It's fine. It doesn't matter where you post it. The idea is that we're here to help, and we would love to help you, and we could just talk through these things even more specifically too, if you have a specific problem to solve.
Yeah, we'll get something set up.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Noah and Sam for setting this all up, and thank you everyone who came and listened and asked really great questions.
Thanks for
Thank
being interested
you,
in learning.
everyone, once again.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for inviting us on.
Bye, everyone.
Stay warm.